How do you choose between the woman you promised to spend your life with and the child you brought into this world and swore to protect forever? I'm 82 years old now, and that question still wakes me up some nights, because I answered it once, decades ago, and I answered it wrong. At the time, I told myself I was choosing stability, peace, survival. I told myself I was being a responsible husband. But looking back, with nothing left to distract me, I can finally admit the truth I avoided for most of my life. It was a quiet evening, the kind that doesn't warn you it is about to change everything. My daughter was young, still living under our roof, still believing her father would always stand between her and the world. My wife sat across from me at the kitchen table, her voice calm but sharp, controlled in a way that scared me more than yelling ever could. She said my daughter was disrespectful, manipulative, poisoning our marriage. She said I had to choose her or my daughter. No compromises, no delays, no middle ground. I remember the silence that followed. I remember how heavy my chest felt, how my mind raced through excuses and justifications. Marriage is supposed to come first. People say a husband should defend his wife. Children grow up and leave, but a spouse stays. Those phrases echoed in my head like advice passed down through generations. Never questioned, never tested in moments like this. I convinced myself my daughter would understand. I convinced myself she would forgive me later. I convinced myself that choosing my wife was the adult, logical decision. What I didn't understand then was that children don't experience abandonment logically. They feel it deeply, permanently. That night, I didn't just choose my wife. I chose silence over honesty, comfort over courage, and short-term peace over a bond that should have been unbreakable. My daughter looked at me differently after that, not angry, not loud, just distant, as if something essential had cracked and quietly slipped out of reach. For years, I avoided thinking about it. Life stayed busy. Work, bills, routines. The daily performance of a marriage that looked intact from the outside. But choices like that don't disappear. They wait, and when you get old enough, when the house gets quiet and the days slow down, they come back with a clarity that's almost cruel. If this moment in my life feels uncomfortable to you, that's not an accident. Stories like this aren't meant to be easy. They are meant to make you pause and look at your own choices before time does it for you. If you've ever felt torn between loyalty, love, marriage, or your children, I want you to know you're not alone. And pretending these conflicts don't exist only makes their consequences heavier later on. Take a second and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think a parent should do when forced into an impossible choice, or simply write the word choice if this story hit closer to home than you expected. Understanding stories like this matters because they don't just belong to the past. They are still happening in quiet kitchens, behind closed doors, in families that look perfectly fine from the outside. If you're finding value in this, please leave a like so this story can reach others who may need to hear it. And subscribe if you want to follow the rest of this journey. There's much more that needs to be said, and the hardest parts are still ahead. After that night, nothing exploded the way people expect these stories to explode. There were no screaming machas, no dramatic exits, no slammed doors. That's what made it more dangerous. Life simply adjusts it around the decision I made as if it were reasonable, even necessary. My wife relaxed. The tension she had been carrying softened. The house felt calmer, quieter, almost peaceful, and I told myself that was proof I had done the right thing. What I didn't see then was how easily love can slip into something colder when fear gets involved. Over time, my marriage stopped being about connection and started being about reassurance. Small moments became tests. If my daughter called, my wife watched my face. If I defended my daughter in conversation, my wife withdrew. Nothing was said outright, but everything was felt. Affection became conditional. Harmony depended on my silence. I started editing myself without realizing it. I avoided mentioning my daughter. I shortened phone calls. I convinced myself that distance was temporary, that once things settled, I'd rebuild that relationship quietly, carefully. But emotional distance doesn't work like a pause button. Every missed call becomes a message of its own. Every unanswered question teaches a child exactly where they stand. Inside the marriage, I became smaller. I thought compromised was maturity. I thought swallowing discomfort was strength. But what I was really doing was trading honesty for stability. My wife didn't ask again. She didn't have to. The choice. The Hodban Meiji. And from that moment on, our marriage functioned on an unspoken agreement, peace in exchange for loyalty. Years passed like that. Holidays came and went. Birthdays were acknowledged late or not at all. My daughter grew older without me noticing the details. I told myself she was building her own life. That's what children do, right? But deep down there was a quiet guilt I kept locked away, because opening it meant admitting something unbearable, that the calm in my home was built on someone else's pain. And here's the part people don't talk about. When you betray a bond once, even quietly, it becomes easier to keep doing it. Not because you stop caring, but because facing the truth requires courage you no longer trust yourself to have. So you adapt, you normalize the distance. You learn how to live with an absence that shouldn't exist. Looking back now, I can see how the marriage I fought to protect slowly hollowed itself out. Love without honesty turns into something fragile, something that needs constant guarding. And the more I guarded it, the more I lost the parts of myself that could have made any relationship whole. If this part of the story resonates with you, leave a comment and tell me whether you believe peace is worth the price of silence, or simply write peace if you've ever made a similar trade. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single fight, no clear aha moment. It was a gradual awareness, the kind that creeps into your chest quietly, unannounced, until one day you notice the emptiness where warmth used to be. My daughter had grown into a young woman who smiled politely when we spoke, who shared updates of her life without expecting me to be part of them, who seemed to measure her words in a way that betrayed caution. She was careful around me, careful around my wife, careful around every conversation that could reopen old wounds. I remember a Sunday afternoon when I invited her to join me for lunch, just the two of us. She agreed, but the laughter felt forced. Her eyes darted around the room. Her words were brief, clipped. She told me about college applications, friends, her small achievements, but I could feel the invisible wall I had helped build. Every choice I made in that kitchen decades ago, every quiet compromise to avoid conflict, had compounded into a distance I couldn't easily repair. The worst part is that I had convinced myself I was doing the right thing. I thought I was preserving the family unit, keeping love alive between my wife and me. But families are not built on the absence of conflict. They are built on trust, presence and honesty. By choosing silence over confrontation, loyalty over fairness, I had inadvertently taught my daughter that her needs could be postponed indefinitely, that her voice could be quieted for the sake of someone else's comfort. There were small signs before that lunch, moments I could have noticed but ignored, her hesitations when calling, the way she avoided staying at home during visits, the subtle deflections in conversation. And yet, I chose to tell myself they were growing pains, nothing more. Each excuse I made became another brick in the wall separating us, a wall that grew taller and stronger with every passing year. That day, sitting across from her, I felt the weight of decades pressing down on me. I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Peace without integrity, without balance, is a quiet form of destruction. My daughter wasn't angry with me. She was distant, hurt in ways I had only just begun to comprehend. I realized then that some moments, some choices, have consequences that linger quietly but powerfully, shaping relationships in ways you can't easily undo. I used to replay that decision in my mind as if it were a single moment, a fork in the road where I turned left instead of right. But the truth is, it wasn't just one choice. It was a series of small confirmations afterward, each one reinforcing the first mistake. Every time my wife complained and I stayed silent, every time my daughter's name came up and I changed the subject, every time I told myself, just a little longer, just until things calm down, just until she understands, those were decisions too, and they carried the same weight as the first. For a long time, I wore my choice like armor. I told myself I was being loyal, that loyalty was a virtue, that a man keeps his marriage intact at all costs. People praised me for being steady, for not letting family drama tear us apart. They saw a long marriage and assumed wisdom. They never saw what it required me to ignore. They never saw the way my daughter stopped asking for my opinion, stopped sharing her fears, stopped expecting protection from me. The real fracture didn't happen the night I chose my wife. It happened later when my daughter realized that choice wasn't temporary, when she understood that I wasn't just trying to keep the peace. I was willing to live without her closeness, if that Essie what it took. Children don't need perfection from their parents, but they need to feel chosen. And I failed her there. I remember one phone call years later, after she had moved out. Her voice was calm, almost detached. She told me she had learned not to rely on anyone too much, that independence was safer. She said it casually, as if it were a strength she had always possessed. But I heard the wound underneath it. That was the moment I knew something essential had broken, something that apologies alone could never fix. Inside my marriage, things didn't become better either. The peace I protected turned brittle. My wife grew more secure in her position, but less warm. Love became something to maintain, not something that flowed naturally. I had chosen loyalty over truth, and the cost of that choice followed me everywhere. I had lost my daughter's trust and, slowly, my own sense of integrity. Old age strips away your illusions. When the distractions fade, you're left with the reality of what your decisions created. I wasn't punished loudly. I wasn't abandoned dramatically. I was left with a quiet, persistent regret, the kind that settles into your bones and reminds you that some mistakes don't explode, they erode. After that fracture settled into place, time began to move differently. Years passed, but nothing healed. Silence filled the spaces where conversation should have been. My daughter stopped calling unless there was a reason. Holidays became optional. Birthdays were acknowledged with brief messages, polite words, no warmth. I told myself this was adulthood, that children grow independent, that distance is normal, but diptum. I knew this wasn't independence. This was protection. She was protecting herself from disappointment, from hoping I would finally choose her. Guilt is a strange companion. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in ordinary moments when you least expect it. I would see a father laughing with his daughter at a grocery store and feel something tightened in my chest. I would hear my daughter's name and feel a rush of shame, followed by the familiar urge to justify myself. I stayed married. I kept my word. I did what I was supposed to do. Those excuses became my shield, even as they hollowed me out from the inside. There were moments I almost reached out properly. Moments when I thought about sitting down with her and saying the truth out loud. Not an apology wrapped in explanations, but a confession. I was afraid. I chose wrong. I failed you. But fear stopped me every time. Fear of reopening wounds. Fear of upsetting my wife. Fear of hearing what I already suspected, that the damage was deeper than I wanted to admit. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier it became. Distance has momentum. Each year, without real contact, made the next one easier to accept. We developed a rhythm of superficial connection. Updates about health, work, weather. No emotions, no memories, no mention of the night. Everything changed. And yet, that night was always there, sitting between us like an uninvited guest we both pretended not to see. As I aged, the guilt grew sharper. When you're young, you believe time will soften everything. When you're old, you understand that time hardens some truths instead. I began to wonder what my daughter told herself about me. Did she think I didn't love her enough? Did she believe she wasn't worth choosing? Those questions haunted me more than loneliness ever could, because I knew my silence had helped create those doubts. If you're listening to this and you've gone quiet in a relationship that once mattered, leave a comment and tell me whether silence ever really protects anyone or just right distance. If you understand how easily it becomes permanent. Getting older changes the way memories behave. They don't fade the way people promise they will. They sharpen, they slow down with you. When the house grows quiet and the days lose their urgency, the past stops whispering and starts speaking clearly. I used to stay busy to avoid that. Work, errands, routines, small distractions that made time pass faster. But eventually, age takes those away. You sit longer, you think more, and the choices you buried decades ago rise to the surface without asking permission. Loneliness isn't just being alone. It's realizing who should be there and isn't. My wife and I grew old together, but something essential between us had already thinned out years earlier. We shared space, history, habits, but not the kind of closeness that fills silence comfortably. When she passed, the house didn't just become quiet. It became empty in a way I wasn't prepared for. And that emptiness made one absence louder than all the others: my daughter. I would wake up in the morning and reach for my phone, thinking about calling her, then hesitate. What would I say after all these years? How do you start a conversation when the most important one was avoided for decades? I replayed imaginary versions of it in my head. Sometimes she forgave me easily. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she didn't answer at all. The uncertainty became another reason to stay silent, even as my time grew shorter. Aging strips away denial. You start counting years differently. You notice how many people are already gone. You realize there are fewer chances left to fix anything. That's when regret becomes physical. It sits in your chest. It follows you through the house. It reminds you that while you were trying to keep one relationship intact, you let another one decay beyond recognition. I began to understand something too late. The cost of my choice didn't end with my daughter. It shaped the kind of man I became: cautious, avoidant, afraid of confrontation. I trained myself to survive discomfort by retreating instead of facing it. And in old age, that survival strategy turns against you because there is nowhere left to retreat. If you're still here, I want to thank you for staying with me through a story that isn't easy to hear or tell. That alone tells me you understand how heavy these choices can be and how long their consequences last. If this story made you stop and think about your own family, your own relationships, or a decision you've been avoiding, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Leave a comment below and write, "I'm choosing differently," if you believe it's still possible to change something before it's too late. If you found value in this story, please leave a like. It helps this message reach people who may be standing at a crossroads right now, still able to choose. And if you want to hear more real, honest stories about love, regret, forgiveness, and the truths we only face later in life, subscribe to the channel. These conversations aren't comfortable, but they matter. And before you go, look at the next video appearing on your screen. It continues this journey into the choices we make, the people we lose, and what we still have time to fix. I'll be there, and I hope you will too.